HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder at Half Moon Gate by Andrea Penrose, read by James Cameron Stewart. Blood only serves to wash ambition's hands. Lord Byron. Prologue. A thick mist had crept in from the river. It swirled around the man's legs as he picked his way through the foul-smelling mud, drifting up to cloud the twisting turns of the narrow alleyways. He paused for a moment to watch the vapour ghosting through the gloom. A shiver of goose-flesh snaked down his spine. Shifting, he peered into the darkness, trying to spot the wrought-iron arches of Half Moon Gate, but only a shroud of black-on-black shadows lay ahead. He was unfamiliar with London, and must have confused the directions. From Red Lion Square he had taken 3, or was it 4, turns, only to find himself lost in a maze of unlit alleyways. Squat warehouses, all sagging slants and filthy brick, were squeezed along the crooked turns, while the boarded-up rookeries rose up at drunken angles, blocking out all but the smallest slivers of sky. A glance up showed only a weak dribbling of moonlight playing hide-and-seek within the overhanging roofs. "Logic," he murmured. "There's no conundrum that can't be solved by logic." Turning in a slow circle, he sought to get his bearings. Left, he decided. Heading left would quickly bring him back to the cobbled streets of the square, where he could start over. He set off again, sure that he'd soon see a glint of light, and yet the shadows seemed to darken and creep closer. He tried to draw a calming breath, but the stench made him gag. Logic, he reminded himself. Just another turn or two would bring him... He stopped abruptly. So, too, did the scuff of steps behind him, but not quite quickly enough. By the laws of physics, it couldn't have been an echo. "Who's there?" he called sharply. His wife had warned him to ignore the note requesting a meeting. He'd intended to do so, but the second missive had been impossible to ignore. So much depended on making the right decision. There was no response, save for the rasp of rusted metal swinging in the breeze. He chided himself for being too jumpy. The crooked walls and overhanging roofs distorted sounds, that was all. He resumed walking, turning left, and then right, and then left again, only to have the sinking sensation that he was walking in circles. There was no flicker of light anywhere. The shadows seemed to darken and creep closer. From out of nowhere came a low, rasping laugh. He quickened his pace. Steady, steady, he told himself. The square had to be just ahead. And yet his boots seemed to have a mind of their own. Faster, faster. Behind him, the echo seemed to be gaining ground. It seemed to be coming from the right. He must head left. Slipping, sliding, he lost his footing as he turned the corner of a deserted warehouse and hit up hard against the soot-dark brick. Pain lanced through his shoulder. Hell's bells! He braced his back against the wall, drawing in a shaky breath. No educated, intelligent man of science should let himself be spooked by non-existent spectres. Logic. And yet, against all logic, the pursuing steps were growing louder. And then, out of the shadows, rumbled a taunting voice. "You may be brilliant in the laboratory, but here in the stews there's no fancy formula for escape, Mr. Ashton." Pushing away from the wall, Ashton took off at a dead run. What devil-cursed hell had he stumbled into? Straight ahead, a wall had he stumbled into. Straight ahead, a wall loomed out of the blackness. He hesitated for an instant, and then the sound of pursuit once again drove him to his left. After skidding through yet another turn, he tried to summon an extra burst of speed, but a slip sent him sprawling. He hit the ground with a thud, rolled through the ooze, and was halfway up on his feet, when a gloved hand, black as Lucifer, shot out and caught hold of his collar. His assailant swung him around and slammed him against an iron grate. Instinctively he threw up his arm to parry the blow aimed at his skull. His assailant rocked back, and Ashton heard the whisper of steel kissing leather as a knife slipped free of its sheath. He was no longer young, but he'd spent most of his life shaping iron with hammer and chisel. His arms were still muscled, his hands still strong. He had no intention of giving up without a fight. Throwing his weight to one side, he broke free of the other man's hold and lashed out a hard punch, taking grim satisfaction in feeling his broad knuckles crack against the other man's skull. A grunt of pain, a vicious oath. Shifting the knife from hand to hand, his assailant retreated a step, then pivoted and moved in more warily. The moon had once again broken through the clouds, allowing a dappling of light to reach the slivered alleyway. It slid along the razored steel, now cutting slowly back and forth through the night. Ashton fished out his purse and threw it down. "Here, take my money. I've nothing else of value with me." His assailant let out a nasty laugh. A mask hid his face, but a malevolent glint showed through the eye slits in the silk. "I don't want money. I want the drawings." How did a common footpad know about the drawings? "Well, what drawings?" he stammered. In answer, the blade flashed a series of lightning-swift feints, driving Ashton back up against unyielding iron bars. He was now trapped in the narrow, gated recess between two warehouses. In desperation, he lashed out a kick, but Evil Eyes was quick as a snake. Dodging the blow, he smashed a knee to Ashton's groin. "I'm tired of playing cat-and-mouse games with you." "I don't have—" gasped Ashton. But a vicious elbow to the throat crushed his windpipe before he could go on. "No, no, no," he mouthed in silent agony. "Dear God, not now. Not when his momentous discovery was on the cusp of changing the world. Please, just let me live," he managed to whisper. "Let you live?" The knife pierced the flesh between Ashton's ribs. "I'm afraid that's not possible." There was no pain, just an odd, tickling sensation. How strange, he thought. Steam was always so pleasantly warm, but the silvery mist caressing his cheeks was cold as the devil's heart. "You see, Mr. Ashton, letting you live would ruin everything." Evil Eyes let the lifeless body drop to the ground. A search of Ashton's pockets turned up nothing but a pencil stub, a coil of twine, and a scrap of wire. Uttering a low oath, he wrenched open the dead man's coat and set to slitting open the lining with the still bloody knife. Nothing. Trousers, boots, stockings. The blade sliced through the garments, and still not a scrap of God-benighted paper was to be found. As disbelief gave way to fury, Evil Eyes slashed a series of jagged cuts through the pale flesh of Ashton's exposed belly. "Damn you to hell! Where are they?" Chapter 1. Why is it that I never win at dice and cards, Rex? Christopher Sheffield kicked aside a mound of rotting cabbage before leading the way through a low archway, while you always walk away from the gaming hells with your pockets stuffed with blunt. He expelled a mournful sigh. It defies logic. The Earl of Wrexford raised a brow in bemusement. Hearing you invoke the word logic is what defies reason. No need to be sarcastic, grumbled Sheffield. Fine. If your question was truly meant to be more than rhetorical, the answer is I watch the cards carefully and calculate my chances. He sidestepped a broken barrel. Try thinking, Kit, and counting. Higher mathematics confuses my feeble brain, retorted his friend. Then why do you play? I was under the impression that one doesn't have to be smart to gamble, protested Sheffield. Didn't that fellow Pascal and his friend Fermat formulate ideas on risk and probability? I thought the odds should be roughly 50-50 for me winning simply by playing blindly. He made a rueful grimace. Bloody hell, by that calculation I must be due to win a fortune, and soon. So you weren't actually sleeping through lectures at Oxford? Said Wrexford dryly. I was just dozing. A pause. Or more likely I was cup-shot. Aberdeen was awfully generous with his supply of fine brandy. Speaking of brandy, murmured the Earl, as he watched his friend stumble and nearly fall on his arse, you've been drinking too much lately. Hell's teeth! Since when did you become such a stick in the mud? Since you led me into this putrid-smelling swamp of an alleyway, he retorted. His own wits were a little fuzzed with alcohol, and he winced as he slipped, nearly losing his balance. Pray, why are we taking this route past Half Moon Gate? Tyler will raise holy hell at having to clean this disgusting muck from my boots. Heaven forbid we upset your valet. Sheffield made a face. You know, you're in danger of becoming no fun to carouse with. Wrexford came to a halt as the alley branched off into 3 twisting passages. Which way? The middle one, said Sheffield without hesitation. As for why we're cutting through here, there are 2 reasons. It's much shorter than circling around by the main street. A grunt, as he slipped again. More importantly, there's a chance we'll encounter a footpad, and given my recent losses at the gambling tables, I'm in the mood to thrash someone to a bloody pulp. The Earl tactfully refrained from comment. Like many younger sons of aristocratic families, his friend was caught in a damnably difficult position. The heir and firstborn usually had a generous stipend, and if not, tradesmen were willing to advance generous credit, but those who trailed behind were dependent on parental purse strings. Sheffield's father, however, was a notorious nip-cheese, and kept him on a very puny allowance. In retaliation, Sheffield made a point of acting badly, a vicious cycle that did no one any good. It was, mused Wrexford, a pity, for Kit had a very sharp mind when challenged to use it. He had been of great help in solving a complicated crime a handful of months ago. "Has Mrs. Sloane decided to move to a different neighbourhood?" asked his friend, abruptly changing the subject. "The last time I paid her a visit, she made no mention of it," he replied. Sheffield shot him an odd look. "You didn't ask?" The squish of their steps filled the air. Wrexford deliberately said nothing. "Never mind," murmured his friend. Charlotte Sloane. A sudden stumble forced a sharp huff of air from his lungs. That was a subject he didn't care to discuss, especially as the throbbing at the back of his skull was growing worse. He and Charlotte Sloane had been drawn together, quite literally, by the gruesome murder of a leading religious zealot, a crime for which he had been the leading suspect. Secrets twisted around secrets. One of the more surprising ones had been that the notorious A.J. Quill, London's leading satirical artist, was a woman. Circumstances had led him and Charlotte to join forces in order to unravel a diabolically cunning plot and unmask the real miscreant. Their initial mistrust had turned into wary collaboration and then to friendship, though that was, mused Wrexford, a far too simple word to describe the bond between them. Chemistry. As an expert in science, Wrexford could describe in objective detail how the combination of their special talents seemed to stir a powerful reaction. However, they lived in different worlds and moved in vastly different circles here in town. Rich and poor, aristocrat and nobody. Charlotte had made it clear after solving the crime that said circles were unlikely to overlap again. Despite her assumption, he did pay an occasional visit to her humble home, simply out of friendship, to ensure that she and the 2 urchin orphans she had taken under her wing were suffering no consequences for helping prove his innocence. But given his own reputation for being a cold-hearted bastard, Sheffield didn't need to know. "We turn again here." Sheffield's murmur drew Wrexford from his brooding. "Mind your head," added his friend, as he squeezed through a gap between 2 derelict buildings. "A beam has broken loose from the roof." The alleyway widened, allowing them to walk on side by side. Wrexford grimaced as a particularly noxious odour rose up to assault his nostrils. "The next time you want my company while you try your luck at the gaming tables, let's choose a more civilized spot than the Wolf's Lair. I really don't fancy—" His words cut off sharply as he spotted a flutter of movement in the shadows up ahead. He heard an oath and the sudden rustling of some unseen person scrambling to his feet and racing away. "Don't fancy what?" asked Sheffield, who had stopped to light a cheroot. "Strike another match and hand it over," demanded Wrexford. "Quickly!" Sheffield dipped a phosphorus-tipped stick into a tiny bottle of nitric acid, igniting a flame. Wrexford took it and approached the corner of a brick warehouse. Crouching down, he watched the sparking point of fire illuminate what lay in the mud, and then expelled a harried sigh. "I really don't fancy finding yet another dead body." Setting aside her pen, Charlotte Sloane took up a fine-pointed sable brush and added several bold strokes of blood-red crimson to her drawing. Man versus Machine. Her latest series of satirical prints was proving very popular, and thank God for it, considering that there had been no sensational murder or flagrant royal scandal of late to titillate the public's prurient interest. As A.J. Quill, London's most celebrated gadfly, she made her living by skewering the high and mighty, as well as highlighting the foibles of society. Peace and quiet put no pennies in her pocket. Charlotte expelled a small sigh. Financial need had compelled her to take over her late husband's identity as the infamous Quill, and she was damnably good at it. However, her income would disappear in a heartbeat if it ever became known that a woman was wielding the pen. She, of all people, knew that no secret, however well hidden, was perfectly safe. But among the many hard-won skills she had acquired over the last few years was the art of survival. Forcing aside such distractions, she turned her attention back to her drawing. The recent unrest at the textile mills in the north had struck a raw nerve in the country. A heated debate was now raging over whether steam power would soon replace manual labour. Many people lauded the new technology, and many feared it. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, studying the violent clash of workers and local militia she had created, the human figures balanced precariously on the iron-dark pistons and condensers of a monstrous, steam-belching engine. "We are all creatures of habit," she mused. However awful, the known was preferable to the unknown. The thought caused a wry smile to tug at the corners of her mouth. She seemed to be one of those rare souls drawn to exploring beyond the boundaries of convention. "Not that I had much choice," she murmured. Not to begin with, perhaps, but honesty compelled her to admit that the challenges, no matter how daunting, were what added a spice of excitement to the humdrum blandness of everyday existence. Raising her gaze, Charlotte looked around at the half-packed boxes scattered around the room, and was once again reminded of the current theme of her art. Change. Change is good, she told herself. Only unimaginative minds saw it as terrifying. But at the sight of all her earthly possessions, a rather unimpressive collection of flotsam and jetsam, lying in disorderly piles, she couldn't help feeling a twinge of trepidation. For several months she had wrestled with the idea of moving from her cramped but cheap quarters on the fringes of the St. Giles stews to a more respectable neighbourhood. The previous week she had finally made up her mind, and with the help of a trusted friend had leased a modest house on Buckridge Street near Bedford Square. Her art was now bringing in a handsome salary from Fawsey's print shop, and along with the unexpected windfall she'd received for partnering with Lord Wrexford, Charlotte expelled a long breath. She had not yet come to grips with how she felt about taking the Earl's money. Yes, she had earned every last farthing of it, and yet beggars can't be choosy. She silenced her misgivings with an old English adage. All those lovely gold guineas would allow Raven and Hawk, the two homeless urchins she'd taken under her wing, to have a chance at bettering themselves. Basic schooling, decent clothing, entree to a world outside the sordid alleyways in which they had been abandoned. Rising, she rolled up her finished drawing within a length of oilcloth, and carefully tucked in the flaps, readying it for delivery to the engravers. A glance at the clock on the rough-planked table showed it was past midnight. The boys had not yet returned from their nightly rambles, and Charlotte tried not to worry about why. From the first time she had found them sheltering in the outer entryway of her tiny house, there had been an unspoken understanding that they were free to come and go as they pleased. She tried to make sure they had more than pilfered scraps of food to eat, and better than tattered rags to wear. They were very bright and clever, and under her guidance they had learned to read and write. But there were moments when she thought she detected a half-wild gleam in the depths of their eyes, a fierce independence, an elemental wariness that refused to be tamed. What if they hated the idea of a nicer house and proper schooling? What if... Steeling her spine, Charlotte cut off such thoughts with a self-mocking huff. Hell's bells! If she had a penny for all the times in the past she fretted over the consequences of a decision, she'd be rich as Croesus. She had done her best to always be forthright with them and be deserving of their trust. Unlike John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's legendary seer and spymaster, she didn't possess a magical scrying glass in which to see the future. She could only try to deal with the present. And at this moment, the present was grumbling for a cup of tea. At least she could now afford the luxury of a spoonful of sugar to sweeten it. A sharp hiss slipped through Sheffield's clenched teeth as he leaned in over Wrexford's shoulder. "Is he dead?" "Yes." Wrexford had felt for a pulse, though the 3 bloody stab wounds piercing the left ribs indicated the victim couldn't have survived. Sitting back on his haunches, he surveyed the violence of the attack, the ripped clothing, the slashed boots, the mutilated flesh of the dead man's belly. "Holy hell!" muttered his friend, fumbling to light another match. The flare of light showed all the colour had leached from his face. "The devil's own work," he agreed. Sheffield swallowed hard. "It's an awfully brutal attack, even for this part of town." The man's neck had been broken, and a knife slash had badly disfigured his face. Lifting the dead man's hands, the Earl examined the broad knuckles, noting the bruising and scrapes. "Looks like he put up a fight." "That explains the victim's wounds." Sheffield averted his gaze. "The footpad must have panicked at the resistance." "Perhaps." Wrexford frowned, sensing there was more to it than met the eye. "But that doesn't explain the cut-up clothing or the slashes made to the body after death." "How the devil can you tell that?" "There was little bleeding from the cuts on his belly, which means his heart had stopped pumping." Sheffield was starting to look a little green around the gills. "Footpads strike for pragmatic reasons," mused the Earl, as much to himself as to his friend. "They want money and valuables, which they assume are in pockets or on fingers. They don't waste time searching seams or mutilating their victims. Unless—" He took a closer look at the ripped lining of the coat and ran a hand between the wool and satin. "Unless the fellow's attacker knew the fellow had something special hidden on his person," suggested Sheffield. "There's that possibility," conceded Wrexford, "but given the signs of blind rage, it's more likely personal. Perhaps a betrayal or a business deal gone bad." His friend appeared unconvinced. "But by his clothing, or what's left of it, the fellow appears to be a gentleman." Wrexford arched a brow as he continued to examine the coat. "Meaning a gentleman is never involved in anything sordid?" A fresh match caught Sheffield's answering grimace. "Point taken." He nodded absently, his attention caught by a small tailor's mark sewn in discreetly at the back of the collar. It appeared that the victim was from Leeds, which added yet another layer of mystery as to why he was lying murdered in one of London's most dangerous stews. A stranger to the city did not simply stumble by chance into these fetid alleyways. As the stinking sludge began to seep through his own boots, Wrexford shrugged off the conundrum. Whatever reason had brought the fellow here was none of his concern. After draping the remains of the coat over the death-distorted face, he rose. "There's nothing more to do here. Let's find a watchman in Red Lion Square and alert him of the crime." A pause. "Assuming you know your way out of this cursed maze." "That way," said his friend, indicating the passageway to their left. As they turned, the Earl spotted two wraith-like shapes flitting dark on dark within the shadows. "The weasels," he muttered. "Where?" demanded Sheffield. "I see nothing." "You wouldn't." Already they had disappeared in the gloom. "They're more slippery than quicksilver." An instant later, 2 boys darted out from a plume of mist on the other side of the alleyway. "Oi!" grunted the elder of the 2. "Another dead body, my lord." "Don't be insolent to your elders," shot back Wrexford. Sniggers greeted the rebuke. Unlike the beau monde, the weasels weren't intimidated by his lofty titles. The younger boy grinned. "I got a new tooth coming in." He raised a hand to his lower lip, or perhaps it was a paw. It was too filthy to be sure. "Here, would you like to take a peep?" "Good."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?